Dave, I remember this match, the main event, John Cena versus Triple H for the WWE Championship, feeling like the first real wholesale rejection of John Cena. Like, you get to WrestleMania, and there had been whispers, some crowds did not like the presentation, but I remember this night in Chicago being like, oh my God, they have what seemed at the time to be a real problem on their hands. We weren't used to processing a babyface this way, and we know, as we talked about last week at WrestleMania 21, that the WWE's business wasn't necessarily worse off as far as John Cena's ability to move numbers because these crowds were booing him. But in 2006, and as the crowd just completely craps on the idea of him going over Triple H in this main event, it felt like a real issue for them.
Yeah, because you never had that in the other. The other one was nobody knew how to read that, and it was just starting to happen. I think the first I really noticed it. I mean, there was always something, but when he feuded with Chris Jericho, who was actually a heel, it was one. But it became one of those things where when Cena would wrestle like Shawn Michaels and Triple H, I think because the older fans who had considered those two guys cooler, it was tough. As I recall this match, I think that the match itself was very good.
Yeah.
But yeah, you had that reaction. And I think a lot of people also went in there expecting that Triple H would win. And then when he didn't, it surprised them because Triple H was still more an established star, and it still was not really the John Cena era, even though people in hindsight will go, oh, the John Cena era started in, whatever, 04, 05. It still was the Triple H era in a lot of people's minds. It didn't really and in a lot of ways, actually, his win in this match was the real passing of the torch in the big picture, because it really was. Triple H was around, but he really wasn't the big star after this match, and John Cena really was.
Absolutely, and he tapped clean in the middle.
He tapped clean to him, yeah.
It was kind of a stunning finish, and you saying that does bring back that general feeling that this actually would be Triple H getting the belt back and the WWE pivoting off what was turning into a kind of gnarly situation with John Cena with the belt, but then they doubled down, and we go from there. Why do you think that, they took such a hard line back then on a guy that, quote unquote, the crowd was rejecting? I think today, if someone did to John Cena, to another guy they tried to push, they'd give up on him in a week.
Absolutely. I think because he moved merchandise. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what it was. And they saw that, and perhaps it could be as simple as it's Vince McMahon's company, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe Vince just saw, hey, this guy's a great babyface. Because based on that narrow parameter of he's good looking, he's got a great body, he works very hard, he can talk, and kids like him, that babyface, that Hulk Hogan model, John does fit into that category. And it could just be that, there's so many decisions they make for cosmetic reasons. And the cosmetic has always been important in wrestling, and perhaps in the 80s it was just incredibly important. But when we get to 2005, 2006, 2007, and even more today, I don't think the cosmetic has ever been as important because, it's still important, but I don't think it's as important as it was in the past, because I think that the fan base really, more and more, it's not who the people think is a tough guy. I mean, when I was a kid, just as an example, when I was a kid, and I would say absolutely through the 80s, maybe into the 90s a little bit, but certainly through the 80s, I would do like call-in shows, and everybody, you'd always ask if it was real.
Oh, yeah.
Who would win a fight between Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair? And it's a preposterous question, but to the average person, that was still important. Who would win between Bruno Sammartino and Dory Funk Jr.?
You never hear that anymore.
No, by this era, you don't hear that anymore. And you also, the other thing you didn't hear is in the Hulk Hogan era, or the Bruno Sammartino era, or the Sting and Lex Luger era. It's like, well, look what he looks like. Of course, he'd beat the other guy up if it was real. So the body was a big advantage. I think that, again, when we're talking 2005, 2006, 2007, I think this is also the rise of MMA.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that people, once they saw MMA and they saw when it comes to a fight, you can't judge a book by the cover, and you start to look at guys not based on their physiques but based on their skill, then all of a sudden with pro wrestling, number one, there was no, well, if it was real, who's the toughest, because you had MMA. MMA was about who was the toughest. So pro wrestling becomes about who entertains me more, and you start figuring out who entertains you more, and then the body is really, it's still, like I said, it's not completely insignificant, but it's less significant. And that said, John Cena was still a big draw, but I think that may be Vince being, judging by, if you look at like Vince's handpicked guy, okay, as opposed to the guys who got it, when you look through history at Vince's handpicked guy, everyone, you start from Hulk Hogan in 1984 on, Ultimate Warrior, Kevin Nash, to a degree Shawn, but all of the handpicked guys, the successes and the failures, Triple H, they all had good physiques. They were big guys, with the exception of Shawn, or very good looking. And what Shawn had was very good looking and a lot of charisma and incredible worker. But if you look through the whole thing, the general rule is good looking guys with good bodies. And, John.
It's the only thing that explains the Luger push.
Well, the Luger push is like, he was the closest thing to Hulk Hogan they had.
Absolutely. Unfortunately,
at that point in time after Hulk Hogan and Ultimate Warrior, probably the worst thing they could do is try to find another guy to fit in that mold, because that mold had run its course.
Well, apropos to this discussion about size, meaning less and less and less, we arrive here in 2006, and the conditions are such that the WWE decides to put the World Heavyweight Championship on Rey Mysterio, a wrestler the proportions of whom, they would never even consider, even 5 years prior to this.
A year prior.
We'll talk about, for people who may not be familiar, the basic story and outline behind how Rey Mysterio ended up getting the title on this show.
I mean, this is a funny one, because Rey Mysterio was pushed. Rey Mysterio was a guy, he was really popular. What happened with Rey Mysterio, when WCW folded, there was a lot of negativity in the company as far as Rey Mysterio. Rey Mysterio's, if you remember when WCW folded, they picked up a bunch of contracts. And Rey Mysterio was not one of them.
Took him a year to bring him in.
Yeah. And it wasn't like they were, like they had conversations with him. It wasn't like it was yes or no. The vibe I got from people there was more negative than positive towards Rey. But the wrestlers, when I talk about like the Hardys, some of the guys from that era, to them, like Rey Mysterio was kind of like an idol to them when they were kids. They would see him and he's smaller than they are. But, all of these guys that came along in the next era, so to speak, 5 years later, were guys who would watch WCW and watch Rey Mysterio and just think, man, look, he could do things that nobody could do. And so he was really over with the guys. Plus, he was known as an excellent worker and all that. So when he was free and well and all that, I think that there was just kind of a push. Hey, let's get Rey Mysterio in here. It would be wonderful to work with Rey Mysterio. So they brought Rey Mysterio in to be a cruiserweight. Remember, they had that cruiserweight championship, and they didn't really, they would beat him all the time, and he was there, but it was no great plans. But he was such a good worker, and he did kind of get over to the fans. So he was not buried, but he was never really pushed past a certain level. Then the feud with Eddie Guerrero came, and that feud, and I take credit because it's not my thing, but what I did notice, and I was writing about this, that in certain markets, Houston, Los Angeles, Dallas, Texas, San Francisco, whenever Rey Mysterio or Eddie Guerrero were against each other or not against each other on SmackDown, because remember, these were both SmackDown guys, the quarter-hour number jumped. Always. And sometimes to an incredible degree. I mean, ridiculous degree. And, all of a sudden, it kind of was, SmackDown became the number one show in Hispanic households, English language show. I mean, there were shows on Univision that beat it. But as far as like on, it beat, everything. Sometimes football games maybe would beat it, an NFL game, but that's about it. I mean, it beat everything on CBS. You get the show on, what was it? Was it UPN, CW? I don't even remember.
It would have been, by 06 it would have been CW. Okay,
so you get the show on CW, and among Hispanic households, it's beating everything on the big networks. And so, and then when Rey would get hurt, that wouldn't be the case. It would drop out of the top 10. And then Rey comes back and it's back to number 1 and number 2. So all of a sudden, it's kind of like one of those things where there's too much evidence and we can't deny it. So he's a star. So he became a star. Then Eddie Guerrero passes away. And Eddie's numbers were as good as Rey's, and actually better. I mean, I remember making a statement to somebody in the company, and I said, like, you guys don't know this, but Eddie Guerrero is the Hispanic or the Mexican. I think I used the word Mexican. Eddie Guerrero is the Mexican Steve Austin, you know, because he's just moving these numbers among Mexicans, but you don't notice it, but he is. So Eddie was the guy. Well, then Eddie passes away, and the natural, you know, even though, you know, Eddie's natural best friend, whatever, in the company, you know, it was like the sympathy guy to push. I mean, they probably would at first thought maybe Chavo, since it's his nephew and it's his family, but the reality is I don't think they had any faith in Chavo, and I'm not saying that they're wrong either. And they went with Rey, and they did the whole thing with Rey and Randy Orton and just all the stuff exploiting Eddie's death, but Rey was the point guy, and I think that they just figured that so they go into the Rumble, okay? And the idea is that Rey wins the Rumble,
right?
Okay? Now, Vince's idea, and I don't know how many people know this, but this was going to be the year that the winner of the Rumble was not going to main event WrestleMania. He had a storyline where Rey would be taken out of it because he did not believe – what was it, Angle and Orton, right? Angle and Orton was going to be the match. And he just and Rey was going to be whatever. I don't exactly remember how the storyline was going to go, but the storyline was that Rey was not even going to be in the match. Vince did not trust him to be that high at WrestleMania because of the size. So it happens. The Rumble, you know, obviously in the Rumble he puts on that great performance. It was 62 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever. Yeah, the start to the finish, longest ever thing. He gets a lot of momentum. The whole writing team at this point Pat Patterson are all Vince. We got to put the title on him. And Vince is like, no one's going to buy it. He's too small, blah, blah, blah. We got to do it. It's over and over, and it's like everyone except for Vince wants to put the title on this guy. So finally Vince goes, okay, I'm going to do it. So he does. Then the flip side of that is as soon as he gets the title, all Vince does is beat him and make the championship a joke. Yeah. And so Vince won at the end.
Countdown to self-fulfilling prophecy.
He in the end, Vince proved that they were all wrong because he gave Rey the championship, and Rey didn't get that over as champion. And to this point, because Triple H has said this and Vince has said this, it's like whenever there's this example, and I think they may have used it with other people later, is that like, yeah, Rey was over until we made him world champion. You've got to know when you stop. You know, how far you can go. And it's like, you don't know because you didn't get, you know, when you made him champion and you had him squashed by Khali and Mark Henry on television, it's like he wasn't champion. And so, yeah, of course it didn't work.
Yeah.
I mean, if you gave it a fair shot, who knows? Who knows?
Maybe the next question is part of that psychology, Dave, but this match is only given 9 minutes. And for a.
Well, that was that. Okay. So now that was, because of the way the show went, I think something went really, really long. They were supposed to have, I believe it was 19 minutes. I see. And I mean, and they were cut at the last minute, and they had a phenomenal 9 minutes. Because I remember it was Kurt, Rey, and Randy Orton, and they were heartbroken because I think that, you know, Kurt's mentality and Rey, you know, it's like, look, Rey's in the main event or a main event at WrestleMania, and Randy Orton is got a lot of pride. And they were out there with the idea that we're going to have such an incredible match. And then, you know, right before they go out there, you go from 19 to 9. And they still had a great match, but, you know, I know they were all really disappointed. But yeah, that's what happened there.
And also on this show, WrestleMania 22, Edge works Mick Foley. It concludes with the memorable scene of Edge spearing Foley through the apron to the floor through a flaming table. And that's pretty much Foley's last stand and last sort of star-making performance, and he did it for Edge in some ways. He at least boosted Edge, who was there in a lot of ways. Orton, even Triple H. Foley was a guy, The Rock. He was such a star maker throughout so many key points for the WWE. How do you remember feeling, though, as he crashed through that fiery table? Did it feel like one too many kind of dangerous bumps at his age, his tenure? How do you remember feeling about this match?
Yeah, well, you know, I like Mick Foley personally, so I never liked when he would do things like that, but I know it was a very well received match, and it was I believe for him, I believe it was actually his WrestleMania highlight, because his other WrestleMania main event was that match where he was, he wasn't in shape, he had mixed feelings, he didn't have a great performance, it was kind of a crummy main event. This one was, for what it was supposed to be, it was a great match, and it absolutely, like you said, it helped Edge. It got Edge over as a tough guy and beating Mick Foley in Mick Foley style match. I don't think it was as strong as the Randy Orton one. I think the Randy Orton one, honestly, was of what Mick Foley ever tried to accomplish. The Triple H and Randy Orton would have been his crowning achievements, I think, because Triple H, that whole series took Triple H from a guy who I thought was a little overpushed to a guy who was really the heel, who was really the top heel and a very viable world champion. And with Randy Orton, I just thought that was just the whole program from start to finish. Randy Orton was a superstar at the end of that program, and that last match just solidified him, as someone who, he could, just have one of the great matches, in a different style than you expect Randy Orton to have.